Hi everyone, I'm Jim White, and I want to show you a problem that I ran into this spring related to gardening. I want to show you why I need to make panels for a raised bed garden. It's late August here in northern Ohio, and here's a field that has not been planted because it was so wet in the spring. In my first video on aircrete, I show this field just about this time of year, planted in soybeans. And this year it was too wet to plant, and they just gave up on it. So it's lying fallow here, and weeds are starting to grow. In this area, if you drill into the ground, you hit limestone 3 to 4 feet down. So the water cannot drain away quickly. It takes a long time for the soil to dry out. There were actually huge puddles laying out here for long periods of time. Here's a spot where my lawn tractor got stuck in the spring when the ground was so soft and wet. And that brown spot over there is where there was a puddle for many days, and there are other spots around here that are like that. This area here where the grass is a different color, or it's darker green over here, this whole area was a giant puddle, and it was here so long that all the vegetation died. We were down to bare dirt, and then this different colored vegetation here has come up during the course of the summer. In the spring, this bush, which is about 8 feet high, was nice and green and beautiful, and a month or so ago it just suddenly turned brown and died, and I think it drowned. So I think that was caused by the extremely wet ground. Now here's the garden that was planted in a less wet time of the spring. And before it was planted, everything was quite wet here. And shortly after it was planted, it rained some more. And now it's been abandoned because basically most of the plants have drowned. So if anybody needs to go to raised bed gardens, it's me, and not because of the convenience, but because of the drainage. If I can have a raised bed garden, the earth in the raised bed should be able to drain when we have this extremely wet weather. I stumbled on a video by a man about tools, and in the video he made concrete sides for raised bed gardens. And he certainly has a lot of tools and knows how to use them, and produced a very beautiful design. I don't have all the tools or skills that he had, so I needed something simpler, and I think I've come up with a rather simple way to do it. The results aren't as beautiful, but my garden is a vegetable garden away from the house where people aren't really going to see it anyway. So let me show you the design for the mold for the sides of the raised bed garden. The design starts with a piece of plywood 2 feet by 4 feet, which you can get at many lumber suppliers. And I'm going to cut that in half to make 2 molds. And here's one side. And then I'm going to just go around the sides here with 2x4s. Which have been ripped down to be 2.5 inches high. Then I'm going to put holes through here so that I can insert a piece of PVC pipe that'll run through there. And then after the mold is taken apart, the PVC pipe can be cut off flush with the edges. So this looks fairly simple, and we'll go ahead and build 2 of these and cast some slabs and see how it works. This is my outdoor workbench. I do any kind of dirty job out here behind the barn. It's made from an old pallet that I just put some 2x4 legs on. Now I'm about to rip these 2x4s down to 2.5 inches, which means I have to cut about 1 inch off of them. So one of the advantages of having a real junk workbench is I can drill into it and cut into it and don't really care. So I just screwed this 2x4 down using wood screws. There's one at this end and one at this end. And then I adapted my circle saw in order to be able to rip this. I don't have many woodworking tools. Most of my tools are metalworking tools. So I'm trying to get by without buying anything. So I'll show you next what I did to my circle saw. So here's my circular saw with the blade cover held back. And what I did was attach a piece of scrap 2x4 to the base plate and set it so that this gap here is the 2.5 inches that I want. In order to attach that 2x4, I had to drill a hole in the base plate at each end to put wood screws into. So let's see how this works. Okay, here we go. Okay, that old saw just barely made it through there. But I think we were successful. So actually it's a piece of scrap that's screwed down to the bench. So we got another one to rip, and then I'll cut them both in half, and then we got to do the end pieces for our mold. But all the 2x4s will be ripped to the same width using this technique. Here's a piece of plywood that's 2 feet by 4 feet. Various lumber places have pieces this size. It's a little less than 2 feet by 4 feet because of the width of the saw cuts that they make it with. Now this is only finished on one side, and the back side has some knots and so forth. So we'll put the good side down when we're cutting so that the saw won't pull up the front laminate. Okay, I marked the center of the board, the piece of plywood, and I'm placing it over the crack here in my workbench. I'll do the same at the other end, and that way the bench can support both pieces, and I can do this job without a helper. I've clamped both of the 8-foot 2x4s that we ripped down to 2.5 inches to my trusty workbench here, and found the center and drew a line using the combination square. So I'm going to take the circular saw and cut these into 4 equal pieces. Well, I wouldn't do it that way if I were you. I don't know what happened, but the saw jumped and we got some shredding of the ends here, which I think will be all right. We'll just put those on the outside of the mold. But apparently that's not a very good way to do it. Okay, the base is 12 inches, and each of these 2x4s is 1.5 inches thick. So to fill in here, we need 4 pieces 9 inches long. 2 pieces for each of the molds. Okay, I think this is a better way to do the cut the length. I've already done one and it worked good. So there's my 9-inch line, and then here's a line that was 1.25 inches from there. So now I can use this scrap 2x4 as my guide to cut this guy off. And this way I can hold it as I cut. Well, that worked much better. There's one that is fit in between the 2 outer rails, and here's another one, and this time I got nice clean cuts without breaking anything. Well, here's my plan. The next step would be to drill a hole through both these rails here to insert this piece of 3/4 inch PVC pipe. And that's what the stakes are going to go through. And I plan to use electrical conduit as the stake. It's much less expensive than rebar or any solid metal bar. And you can see that goes through the pipe just fine. So the outside diameter is a hair over 1 inch. So I'm hoping I can drill a 1-inch hole and wiggle the drill bit enough for this to fit through here. Of course, it'll be halfway up. So I guess that's the next step. Okay, I'm going to do the hole about 3 inches in. That gives me about 1 inch of concrete beyond the plastic pipe. So I'll go to the middle here, 3 inches in from the end. Okay, it turns out I had a 1 1/16 inch hole saw, which drilled the perfect size hole. We got a nice snug fit here for the PVC pipe. Now after the concrete is set up in the mold, when the sides are removed, the pipe will be sticking out of the concrete a little bit. And this stuff cuts very easily. So at that point, you could just take a saw and whack it off. And in fact, you might elect to leave the one that's sticking up alone. You'd only have to cut off the one that was towards the ground. So the next step would be to screw all this stuff together with removable screws, and then coat everything with a food grade mineral oil. I'm using the food grade in case any remains on the concrete and gets into the soil of the garden. So I'll go ahead and finish off these 2 forms, and actually I have a plan for making the castings lighter, which I'll show you when the forms are complete. Well, here's our 2 molds, almost complete. Now you don't want to forget to do this, and that's mark the pieces. So the 2 stands for mold number 2, and on this mold everything ends in 1. So I found you only really need to do 2 corners, and that way every piece ends up with a number. So the next step here is to coat these with mineral oil so that they will not absorb water. As we know, water and oil don't mix. Here's the mineral oil that I plan to use. This was about $20. It's a half gallon. Now I found at the local TSC outlet you can get mineral oil that they use as a laxative for horses, and there it's about $20 for a gallon. So you can decide what you want to do there. Now I found these type of screws are much less expensive uh, than some of the screws that have a flat under the head. But if you just put these by the way are number 10 by 3.5. And if you just put a number 10 flat washer on there, now you have a flat when you screw the screw down. Now 3.5 inches is just a little too long, so I also added a 1/4 20 nut and then another flat washer to give me the length that I wanted. These were $3.99 for a pound. I don't know how many are in a pound, quite a bit. So I drilled holes, clearance holes, through the top parts and then inserted screws and marked the base plate and then put pilot holes through the base plate. These holes actually go the whole way through. And I assembled these using a hand screwdriver. Now I think you can use a power screwdriver to disassemble them, but I would use a hand screwdriver to assemble to make sure you don't strip out the hole. Now there's also a screw going in there and in the other end as well. Now we're going to take one of these apart in order to coat it with the mineral oil. And I think I'll just do one at a time so I don't have any confusion on the parts. By the way, it did some calculations, and if this mold was totally filled with concrete, it would weigh 85 pounds. And I think I have a way to get that down to 59 pounds, which we'll try later. Okay, there's the first one. Okay, there's one coated beside one that has not been coated. I think you can see a slight difference in color there. Well, here's my setup for casting one of the panels. It's a little breezy, so I'm sorry about the wind noise. And I've approximately leveled the mold. And this piece of wire here is going to go under that piece of foam. That's 1-inch thick foam, and it's meant to displace about 22 pounds of concrete. So I'm going to mix the concrete up in the bucket here. This is what I'm using. It's a 60-pound bag. And here's the drill and the auger that I'm going to mix it with. This was last used to mix up driveway topping. That's why it's black. And a 60-pound bag requires approximately a gallon of water. And I have 4 gallons of water here. I don't know why it looks green on camera, but 3 of them are to be used as weights to hold the foam down. I have 2 pieces of wire here. One piece will be under the foam, and this other piece will go on top. A piece of wire down the middle doesn't really do much, but 2 pieces separated act more like an I-beam. So the first thing I'm going to do is spray the mold with the food spray, which is basically canola oil. Then we'll stick the pieces of PVC pipe that the rods will go through to hold the final thing in place. Those will get inserted into these holes, and the wire will get wrapped around those. Well, at this point, my camera had stopped recording, and I still don't know why. So there's a slight missing segment here, and let me show you on the board what happened during that time. I had already wrapped the first layer of wire around the PVC pipe. This is a cross section of the form. And then I had poured and shaked down concrete to that level. So this is all concrete at that point. Then I set the piece of foam in here and put the second layer of screen on top. So then I set the milk jugs on here to hold it down. And that's the point at which we will pick up the video. Okay, this is what is left of a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of foam. It's 1 inch thick. And it has what looks like aluminum foil on one side and plastic on the other. So we're basically just using this to displace some concrete and make our panels a little bit lighter. So I cut pieces 39 inches long by 7 inches wide. And you can also use this type of foam. It's just, this stuff was a hair cheaper. And from a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet, you can get 12 pieces this size out of it. So it's pretty cheap per piece. Now, I cut this stuff using a saber saw with a knife blade. And if you can't find one of these, you can make one by cutting the teeth off of a regular blade and filing it or grinding it down to a sharp edge. The nice thing about this is then there's no sawdust as you cut, so it doesn't make a big mess. So I'm not going to bore you with me cutting this out. If you watch my video on the hot wire foam cutter, I demonstrate this blade cutting both foam and cardboard. It's very handy for cutting cardboard as well. So I'm going to go ahead and cut some pieces and then make some more panels. Well, it's been 4 days now since we poured the concrete. Let's see if we can get it out of the form. Well, there we have it. Next step would be to clean up these edges and cut off the tubes. So that would be the outside side, and it doesn't look too bad. Here's a fairly easy way to clean off the edge of a piece of concrete. It's not too bad. That piece of foam inside should have displaced 22 pounds of concrete, so it doesn't look too bad. Okay, it's not the most beautiful thing in the world, but I think it'll do the job. By the way, mixing the concrete in the 5-gallon bucket did not work out. Luckily, I had this plastic mixing boat and a hand trowel handy, and that's what I mixed the concrete with. Now, if you're not worried about the weight, and this is a handy way of moving these things around with a hand truck, you can get an 80-pound bag of the Quikrete for $1 more, which is $4.50. The 60-pound bag is $3.50. So the cost is the same as messing around with the foam, but it's a lot simpler if you just make it solid. Here's an easy way to move these things around. I've already staked one of them. I have a square here to sort of get it squared up. These stakes are 20 inches long. So about 10 inches of it will be into the ground. And then I suggest you do something like this. To reinforce everything even better. Now it was $3.54 for a 10-foot length of this thin wall conduit. Now I noticed I installed this backwards. I have the smooth side towards the dirt side, so don't do that. So on this one, the rough side is on the inside. Make it approximately square. One of the advantages of this design, you can put these at any angle you want. You could make a triangle, or you could make a smooth curve. So these are 11.5-inch long wire ties or tie wraps. Now this time I'll put these smooth. Oh, yes. I wondered why it wasn't square. Now these pieces are 9 inches high, so with another inch sticking up for a 20-inch stake, I have and I'll flip this one around later so that the smooth side is on the outside. And of course, this is like the minimum size. If we had more of these made up, which I don't, I can make a long, skinny one by keep on going with these parts on the sides. So that's the way I plan to do it. And at this point, I don't see any reason why it can't work.